everyone, and welcome back to the Love Like Crazy podcast. We're your hosts, Jay and Stacy Coleman, and we're so glad that you've joined us. And we just appreciate all of our listeners, and especially if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and follow us along there. And for all those who haven't listened to the earlier episode, be sure to do so, where we talked about the ways to bring out the best in our kiddos. And today we're going to continue that discussion. So Jay, why don't you jump in and help me as we talk about a few more ways that we can bring out the best in our kids.
The last conversation we had, I really enjoyed it. I know you did as well, because you love talking about your kids.
I do.
We love our kids. We love our daughters, our sons. When we say daughters,
Our
they're our
daughter-in-laws.
daughter-in-laws, but they're really
my girls.
they're really ours. I mean, we've taken them as ours, and then our grandkids as well.
Love those babies.
What a blast to be able to talk about them. And just a real fast recap of some things we talked about. We talked about trusting them with responsibility. We talked about valuing them. We've talked about, affirming the uniqueness that each of them had, because our kids are also different.
Right.
And being able to just kind of accept them where they are, accepting the different giftings that God has placed within their lives. And today we're going to continue with that. And the first one, I know you threw the ball in my direction, because the first one was as the dad. A lot of times raising up 3 sons, you did this, but a lot of times the ball fell in my court. And it's really we're going to talk a little bit today about correcting your kids. What I specifically want to focus on is correcting them and not condemning them. Because a lot of times, and let's be honest here, your kids, they can frustrate you. I think that if we are honest as parents, that all of us have those moments of frustration with our kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, in the day and age that we live in, where we have people on social media, having the image of perfect parenting and, like I've got my act together, and a lot of people watch that or see that, and they think, well, shame on me if I ever lose my cool. Shame on me if I ever get frustrated with my kids. But the reality is, I don't care how good you can make things look on social media, your kiddos do frustrate you from time to time.
Yes.
There are times that they push your buttons. There are times that they need to be corrected. And this is kind of one of those subjects that is a little taboo in today's culture. This is a subject that, when it comes to correcting our kids, we feel like if we correct them, sometimes we're ashamed about that, because there is a lot of shaming in the culture that we live in.
Yes.
But scripturally, this is the right thing to do. And scripturally, if you look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 6, when it talks specifically about the relationship that we have with the Lord as believers, it says he disciplines those he loves. Why does God discipline us sometimes whenever we step out of line? Why does God discipline us whenever we mess up sometimes? And it specifically is because he loves us. Now, when you get into reading in depth about this, it helps us to understand discipline is never pleasant. It's not something that we enjoy. I would imagine that when we're talking spiritually, it's not something that the Lord enjoys to do, but he does so because he loves us. And so as parents, why do we discipline our kids?
So what you're saying is, because we love our children,
exactly,
we discipline them and we correct them.
Exactly. And honestly, if you do not discipline your children, if you do not step in there and bring correction to them when they need it, you actually are helping to aid the destruction of their life. And I know that might be, controversial to bring that up and talk about that, but it is truth. And you get into scripture and you study. If you live your life by biblical standards like we do, you know that when you correct your children, you are helping to push them down the path that is healthy and right for their life.
And it's our role as parents to be able to give them that instruction that's needed.
Absolutely. Now, you may have ascertained this by listening to us already. We've talked about this before in the past, and I get it. I know some of the things that we will talk about or could be a little redundant. Or the heart of this podcast is to build a stronger marriage, build a stronger family. And so what that means is some of the times we talk about stuff, it's going to overlap through different episodes. I firmly believe in correcting your children. We actually, and I know that this is going to be controversial to bring up, but we believed in spanking our children. We did so in a manner that was very healthy. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but quite frankly, raising up my sons and bringing them up the way that we did. It does not matter to me if you disagree with that or not. We did one of two things. We did what we felt the Lord was leading us to, but we were in unity about this as well. And so correcting your kids, disciplining your children, here's what I'm going to tell you that you need to do as a married couple. Make sure that you're in unity about the decisions that you make as you move forward. And as you walk in that unity, make sure that both of you are willing and able to carry out whatever decisions that you make. I know for us, we were in unity. We actually had discussions as we were having children, and then as they got into those years that they needed to be disciplined, we were constantly talking about this, constantly going through it and evaluating what we were doing, but we always walked in unity. I remember one time, and you probably remember this as well, we were at your grandmother's house. We called her Granny. Granny since has gone home to be with the Lord, but Tyler was probably 2-ish.
He was really little. In diapers.
And Granny had knickknacks out all over the place. Going to her house and taking children there, it was like a minefield. There was all kinds of stuff that they could tear up and destroy. But Granny refused to pick up her knickknacks, refused to put them out of arm's reach. And so Tyler, he was making his way around playing with all these different things, and he kept getting to her VCR, and it was right there where he could stick his hand in it.
It was at his eye level.
Exactly. And so he kept doing this over and over and over, and I was correcting him. And by correcting him, I meant he was 2. I kept telling him no. I think, a couple times I maybe, patted his hand just a little bit, softly because he's a 2-year-old. And eventually it got to the point where I realized, what, if I don't, discipline him in a firm way, he's going to continue to do this. So we carried in the diaper bag a little paint stir. You really couldn't do much damage with that thing. But Tyler, he finally went for the VCR again, and I took out the paint stir and I gave him a little pat, maybe twice on the leg. Well, he cried. I picked him up, loved on him. Well, that infuriated Granny.
Yes, it sure did.
She was so livid that I would spank my child. And I told her, I said, well, Granny, if you will, pick up the knickknacks and put them out of arm's reach, I won't have to do that. Well, she did not agree. She felt that, I should be able to leave my knickknacks, down where they are. And I said, well, if that's the case, Stacy and I are in agreement that we need to discipline our children in this way. We didn't hurt him at all. We just corrected him in love. And so, but she still disagreed. Well, it didn't matter. We were in unity about how we were going to handle our child. So I sat back and said, you know what? I'm just going to let Tyler do his thing. So over the course of our visit, he got into knickknacks and he got into the VCR again and started knocking stuff over. And eventually Granny did
finally move all
pick
of the
stuff up out of arm's length.
So that he wouldn't get a hold of it.
Right. But the moral of all that is saying that we were in unity about the decision that we had made. We were not going to be swayed, and we knew it was what was best for our kids.
Well, I want to talk to, all the moms, because sometimes it's really hard. I know once our boys got up to be a little bit older and there were different things that you went to correct them on. And then my mama heart was like, oh, I wanted to say, no, but are you going to, discipline in that way? And I finally had to just, come to the place where we have to be in agreement, and we have to show that unity, being in agreement for our kids, because otherwise they're gonna start like pitting us against each other, and it could get out of hand really, really quick. But I know that it can be hard for moms, at times.
Well, I know this will probably tick some mamas off. It's okay. Just hear me out, okay? Your kids, as much as you love them, if you're not careful, they will manipulate you.
Oh, they will.
And especially mom and dad, they will manipulate you against another. I know this because I did this with my parents. And if my mom has listened to this,
you're a prime example. Huh?
I am a prime example. And I only remember one time I went to mom and asked her something, and she told me no. And I went to dad and asked him something, and he said yes. And I carried through with that, whatever it was. But dad, eventually they got together and talked through what it was I had, manipulated them on.
Then you were really in trouble.
Right. When dad figured out what had happened, then I got corrected. And he said, don't ever do that again. If your mother tells you something, that's what we stand by. And the same thing, if I tell you something, that's what we stand by. So being together in unity is the most important thing of all in regards to correcting your children. Now, so let me point out a couple things here. If you're not willing to discipline your children, Scripture very plainly points out to us that you are helping to participate in their destruction. Proverbs 19:18, it says, "Correct your children while there's still hope. Do not let them destroy themselves." Now, we know when we get into Proverbs, it is actually just, it's wisdom for our lives. And I love what the writer is saying here, because as parents, if we're not willing to discipline our children, the mischief, the trouble that they get into, it ramps up the older that they get.
Oh, right.
I have watched this with parents before, that they refuse to discipline their kiddos, or they discipline them in such a light way, it really did not matter. And that child is maybe 8 years old, they're bad. They get to being 12 years old, they step it up a little bit further. They get into the teenage years, they step it up a little bit further. And by that time, it's kind of past the point of, it's past the point of no return. If you say, hey, we're going to start disciplining when they're 16, 17 years of age, you've already missed the point where you have the ability to influence their life. So that's why I think it's important whenever your kiddos are little, from the time that they are born, although I'm not saying, whenever your child is 6 months old that you're correcting. That's why it's appropriate to correct them at the age that they are appropriately. And so with that said, if you teach them and train them all the way through, you may still have some challenges whenever you get into those teenage years, but it'll be a lot more effective for you to be able to step in and exert the authority that you have as a parent.
So it's important then to not give out empty threats, whenever you're, you have to follow through with whatever you're dealing with.
Well, listen to this. Proverbs 13:24 says, if you refuse to discipline your son, it proves you don't love him.
Right.
Now that's a strong statement right there. But
if you
as
love
parents,
them, you will discipline
if
them.
we love our kids, we are going to step in and we are going to discipline them. Now, what does that discipline look like? I believe it looks like what you and your spouse have agreed to discipline them. For us, it meant a couple different things. We used quite a few different methods. We did believe in, we didn't spare the rod. We did spank our children if it came to that point. We did believe in setting them in the corner for, a period of time. It might be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever the punishment was. It did mean that we took away privileges from them. It might mean that they go sit in their room for several hours, and there were no forms of entertainment in there. So there were several forms of discipline that we used against our kiddos, and we did not let things go. If there was something that we, let's just say we're out and about in town, we would, we lived in a rural community, and let's just say we went grocery shopping and they acted up. And we told them, hey, when you get home, we're going to punish you.
We're going to deal with this, yeah.
We did not let that go. A lot of parents would say, you know what, and they got home, let's not ruffle feathers here. Let's just kind of let that go. They've been pretty good since then. No. You're teaching your children inconsistency. When you get home, you have to be willing to follow through.
You can't forget what they did. They're banking on the fact that you're going to forget about what happened at the store, and maybe then they can not be punished or be disciplined in any way. So you need to stick with it.
I may have shared this story before. I don't know, but I know that whenever I was probably about 5 or 6 years of age, we were at Kmart as a family, and me and my sister were cutting up bad. We were acting up, and my dad told me, he said, when you get home, he had already corrected us several times, when we get home, I'm going to discipline you. And I remember some hours went by before we got home, and when we got home, family gets out of the vehicle, mom, dad go in the house, me and my sister, we go play, and we are thinking that he has forgotten what he had told us when we were at Kmart. And let a little bit of time pass. I don't know, an hour, 2 hours. And eventually I heard him holler my name, heard him holler my sister's name. And it struck us right then and there that he exactly remembered what he was going to do. And sure enough, he followed through with the discipline. And it told me that my dad has a good memory.
That's right.
But it showed me that he had consistency in his life, that he was not going to tell me one thing and do something else. He was a man of his word.
That's an important word right there, consistency, when it comes to disciplining our children. I mean, if we continue with these empty threats of, one more time or two, if you do that one more time, it's not going to be healthy unless we follow through with what we're saying.
Well, let me say this. Don't teach your children dishonesty by being dishonest with them.
That's good.
In other words, don't tell them something and not follow through with it. And that could be correction, but it also could be something that you tell them, hey, if you make a good grade in school, I'm going to do this for you, and then you don't follow through with it. We want to teach our children honor. We want to teach our children honesty. We want to teach our children integrity. And that comes from us as parents modeling that for them. And I know that we're talking about correction here, but don't tell your child, hey, you're being bad. I'm going to do this. I'm going to correct you when we get home. And then you get down the road a couple of hours and you forget about it, or you brush it under the rug because in your mind, your opinion, they're being good right then and there. Well, that shows them that they can pull the wool over your eyes. And I don't recommend that at all.
And then too, you're just aiding in that bad behavior, and it's going to snowball and get worse.
Yeah. So with that mindset of what we're talking about, following through, how do we correct our children in the proper way? I think that this is something very important for us to be able to talk about, because remember, we're talking about things that bring out the best in our kids.
Right. I would say you don't want to discipline them when you're angry.
Never. Now, here's the question you have to ask yourself. Have your kids ever made you angry?
Oh, sure. Yes, many times over.
I know that there were times that you would call me out of frustration. I'd be at the office, you'd be at the house, and you would call me and different things that the boys were doing. And, because you had never had boys, you were not raised around boys. So you would ask me like, what should I do? And I would, hey, this is how I would handle it. I remember one time you called me and you said, hey, the boys, Bryce and Reese, our younger one and our middle one were fussing. And Tyler told him, he's the older one, said, hey, we're going to handle this like men. And so he made them go out and get on the trampoline and duke it out like men. And he was the referee.
And I called you and I said, oh my gosh, they're on
the trampoline.
They're on the trampoline.
They're beating
fighting.
the snot out of each other. What do I do?
What on earth?
And I said, well, first of all, go out and talk to the referee and find out who's winning. But I told you honestly, there's some things there that they're going to work out, but go out and make sure that things are being done, properly, that they're not hurting each other. Because I think they were wrestling. But, if you need to step in and correct them, then do that. And you did.
Well, and there were times that, I was pushed to the limit, and automatically would say, all right, when your dad gets home, it's going to be twice as bad.
Yeah. Well, somebody could say, hey, is that y'all's idea not to correct in anger? No, that's biblical. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 says, don't keep on scolding and nagging your children, making them angry and resentful. Rather, bring them up in loving discipline with suggestions and godly advice. Now, that's a mouthful that I just threw out there, but basically that verse is telling us not ever to discipline our children in anger. Here's how I handled that, because my kids did make me angry sometimes. I waited until I calmed down. Would take some time to be, have my wits about me, that I'm not going to correct them out of anger. I'm not going to be at the place where I'm taking that anger out on them. But once again, with that said, I didn't want to, once things settled down and I was no longer angry, I still followed through. Because with that in mind, if you let things settle down and you say, well, you know what, they're being good, I'm not going to discipline them now, then you're just teaching them that they can pull the wool over your eyes.
You can get away
so
with it.
Don't ever discipline in anger. I think that if you do discipline your kiddos in anger, whether you spank them or correct them or fuss at them or whatever, if you do that in anger, there may be some things said, there may be some things done that you will regret. You'll have to go back to your kiddos and apologize later. So I think you're right on right there whenever you talk about don't ever discipline in anger. The other thing I would say is this: make sure you watch your words, because a lot of times in frustration, we can say things that we don't really mean because our emotions are leading us in that moment. And so with that in mind, you want to make sure that the things that you speak to your children are truthful, that you are in that moment where you're emotional, you allow yourself to settle down and gather your wits about you. And I know for us, one of the things that we always did, I would always talk to the boys about, do you know why we're correcting you? And I would make sure that they could say back to me or to you exactly what it was they were being corrected about.
Wrong,
And then we would correct them, whether it's putting them in a corner, whether it is disciplining them by spanking them, whether it is sending them to their room. And then later, after the discipline or the correction was carried out, you and I would go and take time with them and make sure, do you understand why we disciplined you? And then,
We
there
would
was a
pray for
moment of,
them.
just loving on them, encouraging them, and
Mhm.
praying for them as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
we would definitely pray with them.
make sure that you are correcting your children, that you're consistently, there's the word again,
Mhm.
correcting your children. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is loving them unconditionally.
Oh, yes.
And of course, I know whenever we get into talking about this, you love talking about your kids,
I do.
but I know you want to talk a little bit about this, and as far as is just making sure that we're able as parents to show them the love that they need to be able to receive from us as parents.
That's right. We need to be able to love them unconditionally. I mean, when our kids mess up, we need to be able to love them anyway, and they need to know and feel that we love them no matter how bad of a situation that they may find themselves in. And then
Well,
also,
in parenting, I don't mean to break in, but parenting is like a roller coaster sometimes.
it is, especially when they're teenagers.
Yeah.
Especially when they're teenagers, and then we have to, they have to know that we forgive them when they mess up. It doesn't need to be a situation where like they do something wrong and they're afraid to come and talk to us about it. They need to be willing to, like, I'm going to run to mom and dad because something has happened, and whether there's consequences or not, because they know that we love them
Yeah.
no matter what they do, and that we're going to forgive them, and just like, I mean, the Lord has forgiven us of our sins, that they know that we will forgive them as well.
I like that, because when we mess up, we know that God forgives us.
Mhm.
Our kids mess up.
Yeah, that's right.
And it is easy to allow the frustrations to carry over.
Mhm.
And maybe even we have a little bit of resentment in our hearts
Yeah.
towards our kiddos, and we don't ever want to let that happen. So
No.
I like that. I didn't even think about that one way that we can show them that unconditional love is by forgiving them
By
and
forgiving
walking in
them.
that forgiveness towards them.
Yes, and letting them know just how much that we love them. And when we love them unconditionally, we can, we can forgive them, and we can also just let them know that we're never going to give up on them.
That's good.
Regardless of what happens in their lives. So we're in their corner. We're for them always.
Yeah, I know that there was a time whenever the boys that they weren't doing so good in their studies. I'm not going to name any names. Not doing so good in their studies.
They probably know who they are.
And got a call from a coach, and he filled us in on the situation, and come to find out there were assignments. They were this assignment was due, that assignment was due. And we called them in and said, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. You've not done what you were supposed to do, but we know that you can. And so instead of, saying, well, it's over, you fell for the year or whatever,
No.
we told them, you can do this.
Right. We believe in you.
You got this. We believe in you. And sure enough, they got all those assignments done. And within a couple of weeks, they brought their grades up to where they needed to be. And it is so easy in this world to want to give up on stuff, to want to throw the towel in, to want to walk away from something. That's why the divorce rate is so high in this country, because a lot of times people get frustrated, they get fed up, and they throw in the towel and walk away. And within our families, our spouse needs to know that I'm never giving up on this. We're going to work on this. We're going to build this. We're going to grow this. But our kiddos also need to know that we're never going to give up on you. We're going to believe in you, and we're going to walk through whatever this world brings against us together.
That's right. And if we're their encourager, then that's going to bring the best out in our kids.
Absolutely. So there's a lot in this. Like Stacy said earlier, if you have not listened to the previous episode, you need to go and listen to it.
Yeah, listen to both.
Because it was one about that will really help build your family and build your kiddos. And it's a lot of good information. So today we talk about making sure that we correct our kids. We're never going to condemn our kids. We're going to correct them in love. We're going to follow through with that correction. Let me bring up something that I'm thinking about now in regards to correcting our kiddos. It's important that we correct them based on their personality as well. I know that one of our sons, we were correcting him, and we noticed that he was having some issues. He was young, though. He was probably 3-ish, 4-ish, and he was just being very defined in some areas. And we noticed that the way that we were correcting him wasn't necessarily working. So I remember you and I talking about it, praying about it, and backing up and correcting him in another way. And that became very effective. Now, here's the cool part about that. Even though we changed our method of correction a little bit, we were still consistent with what we were doing.
Yeah.
And it began to work within his life. And now here he is, in his 20s, married, got his own family.
Because our kids are individuals, and we need to treat them that way.
Yeah. So I know in previous episode, we talked about the uniqueness that each of them have,
Right.
and that carries over into correcting them.
That is true, into discipline. You're
So,
right.
know their personalities, and I know that you do as a parent, but also be led by the Holy Spirit in correcting them. That if something is not working, then maybe take a step back, look at it a little bit
Reassess it.
differently, reassess it, and figure out, but still be consistent in what you're doing. So we're
Yes.
talking about correcting, not condemning, loving them in an unconditional way. And I like the last thing that you said, never giving up on them.
Never
We're
give up
never,
on 'em.
ever going to give up. And I know that there's frustrations with parenting. I know that there's days that you want to throw in the towel and, go hide in the, maybe the pantry or something like that.
Yeah.
But don't give up. Tomorrow will be another day and you'll make it through.
Yeah. They need to know that we're in their corner.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed this episode.
Yes, it's been good.
Talking about things that will help build your family and help raise your kiddos up in a way that they'll be productive in society and walk out that purpose that God has for their life. So listen, thank you for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then like, subscribe, share, help us get the word out. We've had a great time today. I'm Jay.
And I'm Stacy.
And this is Love Like Crazy.